All right, everybody. I'm going to start dismantling this and see how much of it is salvageable and how much more I'm going to have to find. Like I said before, I think I'll be able to salvage a good amount of this saw. Maybe not the starter cover. No. Well, maybe not the starter cover, but we're going to see. To me, it looks like I will be able, with a little bit of engineering, be able to use the clutch side crankcase half. All right, so let's take a look at this. It's missing literally this whole entire back half right here, but looks like all these parts right here are actually pretty good. So I'll hunt around online and hunt around to see if I can find one that's got a intact cover right there. I'll even hang on to that in case I need a spool, spring, whatever. All right, that'll go down in the box of parts for the moment. All right. Once again, I'm going to emphasize, please clean your saws. There's no need, let me see if I can get a little more light on this. There's no need that there needs to be that much dirt inside of the flywheel and flywheel nut. To me, that just seems a little bit excessive. I've been getting my shed actually pretty cleaned up. I built another entire shelf, so a lot of the stuff that was behind me on the floor is now up on a shelf and actually somewhat organized. Normally I don't always dump the stuff on my bench, but I'm going to be cleaning it up, and this is just the teardown phase. This isn't the assembly phase. My bench will not stay quite that dusty. I need to charge me some batteries, but it's honestly been like literally 20 degrees out for the past couple days, which makes battery charging and stuff like that a little bit more difficult. And you can probably see we're missing fins right here and right here. I may end up having to get a new cylinder eventually, but for the moment we're gonna kind of roll with this one, see what I can get out of it. This is not going to be for sale anytime soon. This will be my 661 to tinker with, experiment, see what I think about it. And again, that right there is why I like to use a flywheel puller. Something I am most likely going to do. I'll see. I might look for another flywheel, or I may just try to break these fins opposite off so that it doesn't end up out of balance. This is not something I'm going to recommend for everybody to do for a repair, but so I don't end up with, you know, $1,200–1,300 in a saw that I could have just bought a brand new one for $1,200. This particular saw right here is me looking around finding one that's had a tree dropped on it, a handle that I gave maybe 30, 40 bucks, 50 bucks for, I don't remember offhand now. A crankcase half that I gave like $65 for. This is not me going out and paying like top shelf prices for every used piece I'm finding. I spent more money in the piston rings and bearings and seals than most of the parts. All right, that's actually in really good shape right there. I need a screwdriver real quick. There we go. What size did I have on there again? It's a 17, that won't work. All right, rotate it over by hand before you do this, so that you don't smack the, oh, it also helps if you didn't take the piston stop out. Let's screw that in a ways. All right, boom, right there. All the way up to top. All right. I'm not going to recommend that all the time, but sometimes you got to pull your socket forward a little bit. All right. If you can afford one over after some time, if you do very much work on chainsaws, I would recommend a 1/2 inch or 3/8 impact. It will just improve your clutch pulling and your flywheel nut pulling. You just got to make sure you're going in the right direction. I honestly don't care what brand you might want to pick, what platform, but just to have one with a good high foot-pound, that's all I would recommend. Just make sure whatever you're using, it's got an excess of torque. That way you can just knock that clutch off with maybe one try. Well, yeah, a lot of these parts are going to need to be cleaned pretty well. Overall, if he just hadn't dropped a tree on it, I would say this saw is not in bad shape, all things considered. I know it happens to all of us. I've dropped at least one saw or one tree on a saw, but always try to be patient and kind of look at what you're doing. Don't get into a rush, especially when you're falling a tree. That's where things get more expensive. It's going to be more expensive if you drop the tree on your saw than if you'd have just taken a few more minutes, looked around, kind of paid attention to what's going on. Saws cost money. Patience will save you money. All right. Before I start pulling out my crankcase bolts, let's pull this cylinder back off. You may have noticed that some of these bolts are actually not super tight. That's because I have pulled this off before. All right, so there's that right there. Okay, so the reason I also wanted to pull that out, we're going to take these screws out here in a minute, but let's first see if I can get the rest of these out. You may have noticed that I don't have a whole lot of screws I have to pull toward the front. Again, because something kind of got dropped on this thing. All right, nothing down low needs to happen. So far, I'm not super enthused, but I'm also not disappointed. This looks like it's going to be a fun saw to put together. I just wish some of the parts had been in a little bit better shape. But that's what you get into whenever you buy a saw that's had a tree dropped on it. I will pull that piston off here in a minute. Seeing a teeny bit of what I might consider to be discoloration on the that looks like a dowel pin right there. All right, put some screwdrivers back away real quick. Let's see how this thing wants to come apart. This is the way I recommend to split a crankcase. First, let's get the piston off of there, and I'll show you kind of how I like to use the puller. All right. For convenience sake, if you want to not lose a retainer pin, stick your screwdriver in and put your thumb over the hole. And you want to be careful not to actually stab yourself in the thumb, but you saw whenever it snapped out, I was able to keep it from flying all the way across my shed. All right. Now, I'm not being super gentle because I'm not really going to reuse this piston, wrist pin rings, or even the wrist pin bearing. I have a new one. I want to give myself the best shot for this thing being successful. But if I need to save a piece, I'll have them sitting over there at the end whenever I start assembling.